Good evening. Glad to have you back. We don't have any new folks that I see, so I don't really need to introduce Brian to you, but I do need to make a correction. That yesterday, I failed to properly introduce him. Uh-oh. What's going on? There it is. Oh, there it is. Okay. So I just wanted you to know who Brian really is. He is Dr. Brian Thomas, PhD, SAT, ACT, LSD, don't tell anybody, DDT, CEO, AKC, he's got dog stuff. I mean, it's all Brian, all the way. And Dad. And Dad. So I just, he was devastated that I didn't acknowledge his degrees and his interest and his foibles and everything else. So anyways, yes. He was just giving me a hard time yesterday, but I just gave him a hard time back. So I'm glad to have you tonight, and I'm just going to turn it over to Brian, and we're going to have 5 dinosaur details. That's not the title you told me. You said Discovering Dinosaurs. No, it's not the same. It's 3 words versus 2 words. All right. All right, Brian, go ahead and come on up.
From a quote-unquote friend. I appreciate that. Well, thanks for coming back on a weeknight for our creation conference at Alvin Bible Church. Before I forget to make this announcement, I better do it. Tomorrow, my family and some friends are going to a theater in the Dallas area. Tomorrow the 20th? No. Wednesday the 20th. Okay. We're going to go to a theater and see a Christian movie that's in the theaters for one night, Wednesday. Some theaters might have it on Thursday night, the 21st also. But anyway, it portrays Noah's flood, and it shows the historicity of Noah's flood, and it'll be in theaters. The movie is called The Ark and the Darkness, and it incorporates a lot of the research that ICR scientists have been doing over the last 10 years, investigating the rock layers and how thick they are and how extensive they are and how much they look like the flood made them. And so we're looking forward to seeing that movie. And if you want to get a gaggle of pals together, go to the theater and see The Ark and the Darkness and support a Christian friend who's made that movie. I encourage you to make that happen. Well, tonight is Dino Night, so thanks for coming. And we're looking at 5 dinosaur details that I wish I knew when I was young, so I wouldn't have spent so much time being confused about dinosaurs and how do they fit into world history? Like, when were they alive? How did they die? I was confused about that, and I had to really dig in. And one of the places I dug was the Bible itself. And as I'm looking at what the Bible says about creation first, then, 1,656 years later, the flood. Creation and then the flood. And I look at those 2 historical events portrayed in Scripture, and I'm thinking, where do the dinosaurs fit in this? And then I thought, I don't know, I'll have to look at the fossils. So now I've found fossils and historical artifacts and looking at the real world of fossils, and I'm trying to find out, is there a match? Does what I see in the fossils match what the Bible suggests about history? And of course, I find 5 matches. And so here's my introduction to the Institute for Creation Research. We have a mission statement, and it's all about amplifying worship, glorifying Jesus instead of nature as the creator. We want to edify Christians and pastors even to look at the world through the perspective of creation and see if that fits. And then even in evangelism, and as I shared yesterday, we are more bold in our witness when we have more confidence that we have answers to people's questions. And so we have that. So this answered my questions about dinosaurs. These 5 details really did. The first dinosaur detail that helped me sort it out was clever design. And I've had people tell me, dinosaurs look like they were evolved through haphazard natural processes because the dinosaur bones, they don't fit well. They're misshapen. And I asked one of the guys who said this, I said, which ones are you talking about? And he said, well, there's a website. Well, where's the website? So he gave me a website, and it was just some guy, I don't know, that built some website, because the internet, it's the source of all infallible knowledge. And some guy talking about how he didn't think that this looked right. Well, okay, if one guy thinks it doesn't look right, that's one thing. But I went to the dinosaur experts and to the fossils themselves, and boy, we are marveling at the clever design in these dinosaurs, including this one. So tonight, we're going to say dino names. The first dinosaur is going to be named, say it after me, Diplodocus. And there's Diplodocus on display at the Denver Natural History Museum. And I'm standing there with my camera, taking a shot here and a shot there, and it's just so big. This animal's 25 feet. Well, the adults, some of them got 100 feet long, these sauropod dinosaurs. Sauropod, that's with the long tail, long neck, and all 4 feet on the floor. So that's this guy. And I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, okay, does this look like it's haphazard or cleverly designed? And I look at the arch shape on top of that hip bone, the arch. And there's a little arch that the femur comes up against that little arch, the femur bone. It's the leg bone. So there's a little arch here and a big arch there on the hip, and it reminds me of arches. And these arches, built by ancient Romans, standing for 2,000 years. These are in Ephesus. Paul the Apostle might have seen these. And they're still there. And if you look really close, you can see teeny tiny people walking along these arches. Now, people are walking on the arch in the picture, but imagine if the arches themselves walked. If the bridge could walk around and find another place to, because that's what you have with dinosaurs. And when we look at this, we don't go, the river eroded rock and left these arches. No, we don't. The wind and water, and no, it wasn't outside. It wasn't natural. It was designed. It was intentionally crafted. And how much more intentional would the craftsmanship have to be to build one of these bridges with pillars and an arch to support between the pillars, and to have that be able to walk around? And that's exactly what we have with Diplodocus. And by the way, let's back up a few steps. You can see another arch, and that arch is from the front legs to the back legs. And so it's just like pillars, front legs, back legs. Its whole body is a big arch, and then it supports these wings. And literally, engineers who design airplane wings, they have to deal with this problem. How do you build an airplane wing strong enough to support itself and not fall down, strong enough to support the weight of the fuselage? Fuselage, kids, it's like the main tube where you sit down when you're in an airplane, okay? And then, but to make it lightweight but strong. Okay, raise your hand if you would sit in an airplane where the wings were made of bricks. You would? Well, you would sit in the airplane, but you wouldn't get off the ground, so you're still safe. We want you to be safe. Well, the engineer who built this creature had to deal with the same construction challenges and overcome those challenges through engineering. And so that's why these sauropod vertebrae, that's the neck bones, that's why they have pits, holes, raised ridges, strengthened just at the points where they need to be strongest, and lightened just at those regions where they can be, where the weight can be saved. And in fact, the vertebrae get lighter weight and less dense as you go toward the head, away from the body, until the very last vertebra, the one right behind its head, is the same density as styrofoam. But it's just as strong as it needs to be to hold that head way out. Sometimes these necks 30 feet long. And it's a mobile boom. And someone thought ahead. That's the only way to get this kind of construction. In fact, the evolutionary experts, my colleagues, recognized this. And they revealed what they knew in this sign. So here I am at the Field Museum in Chicago, and I'm going through the dinosaur exhibit, because that's what I like to do. And I saw this sign, and I thought, they got it right. It says sauropods were engineered. Okay, so I took a picture of it, because this illustrates exactly what Romans 1:20 tells us straightforwardly. It says, for the invisible qualities of God have been made known through that which he has made. Okay, so the invisible qualities of God, like he's a really good engineer, has been made known through the sauropods that he has made. Now, if I were to ask the person, the evolutionary scientist or writer who put together this sign, okay, if sauropods were engineered, who do you think the engineer was? Now, who do you think they would identify as the engineer? If someone said nature or natural processes or evolution, those are the magic words that we have, that our culture substitutes in and swaps out for an actual engineer. Now, I'm not willing to do that. I'm able and willing to say, you know what? If I see engineering, I'm going to say engineer actually did the engineering. So here's a younger version of me back when I was handsome, and I'm holding a dinosaur egg. It's a hadrosaur egg. Everybody say hadrosaur? Hadrosaur is a duck-billed dinosaur, and you can see a little juvenile. It's like a 5-year-old duck-billed dinosaur there. And but these creatures, the adult duckbills, they would get 40 feet long, and you could walk underneath. You could walk between its front legs, and your head would never brush its belly. So these were big, big animals. But they started from an egg smaller than a football, and I'm holding a duckbill dino egg. Now imagine an engineer who is so clever that he can design a system, a machine, that builds itself out of ingredients from its environment. And that's what these things were. So humans can't even approach this level of cleverness when we engineer. I mean, can you imagine like a cell phone, and you start off with you're a kid and you say, I would like my first cell phone, Mom. Have you ever wanted a cell phone? You're waiting for one? And so Mom says, okay, let me give you a baby cell phone. Here you go. And it starts off really tiny, and you wait, and the cell phone like gets sand and turns it into glass, and gets carbon and turns it into computer chip, and it's like growing, and wow. Now, that would be marvelous. A machine that actually builds itself and copies itself and makes another cell phone that grows into a bigger cell. That sounds like it's science fiction, but that's what happens every day in the world around us, the world of biology. So the biological machines that make up animals, including the extinct animals, they operated with this extraordinary level of cleverness in their engineering, so that their bodies were machines that could copy themselves. Now, these evidences make it clear that God made the beasts of the earth, just like it says in Genesis 1:25, after his kind. By the way, there's only like 5 sauropod kinds. There's only about 70 or so basic dinosaur kinds, several hundred species names, but you know, if I get to name a species, then I get fame and funding for my next project. So there's a little bit of personal motivation on the part of scientists to get a new name out there. Wow. But really, there's only 70 basic dinosaur kinds. And so we can illustrate that. Have you seen Triceratops? 2 brow horns, 1 nose horn, 1, 2, 3. Well, that's Triceratops, right? And he's got a flat flare on the back of his head. But some of these ceratopsian, and it's got a tank-like shape, so it's a tank body-shaped dinosaur. But some of them have, the frill on the back has big holes in it, like Torosaurus. But it's still a ceratopsian. So that's the word we use. God made this ceratopsian kind of dinosaurs, and from that, they diversified. Some had a lot of horns along that frill, little horns. Some had no horns. And some had the really tiny frill, and some had a great big giant frill. And so these are all variations on the one dinosaur kind, the ceratopsian kind. And we can say something similar about each of these basic 70 dinosaur kinds. Where would they fit on board Noah's Ark? 70 dinosaurs. The average size of a dinosaur, including these giant sauropods, the size of a bison. So like a big cow. That's the average size. So 70 big cow daddies plus 70 big cow mommies That's 140 animals, and that would take up one corner of one of the 3 decks of Noah's Ark. If you map out Noah's Ark, you find that, yes, all the extinct animals and all the living basic kinds of animals would have easily fit. In fact, they would have fit in just 2 of the 3 decks of Noah's Ark. So that's what I think. I'm thinking that these animals were made. God made the beasts of the earth on which day of creation? Days of creation. Let's think about, so day 5 was the sky creatures and the sea creatures. Then day 6, land creatures, and then finally, man. Okay, so land creatures. And I'm thinking probably, most likely, this was a land, because they had legs. These dinosaurs had legs, were able to walk on land, and they're beasts. I mean, if anything qualifies as a beast, it would be a dinosaur. So it's alive at creation. Now, they may have lived at the same time as humans, but I'm not convinced that they necessarily lived in the same place as humans did, just like we don't like to live in the same place as dolphins. Like, we don't live in the sea. Dolphins are in the sea. We live on the land. We don't live in swamps. There's a few swamp people, but not very many. So we don't like having alligators in our backyard, and so we kind of live where they're not. But imagine an alligator that's 45 feet long. They existed. That we know them from fossils, like Dinosaurs. And imagine other creatures with big giant teeth and big giant mouths living in swamps and wetlands. I don't think that people lived necessarily in the same place, but they may have lived at the same time. Why am I going through this? Well, I think that the reason we see rock layers with dinosaurs in certain layers, and then hard ground living creatures like deer and dogs, maybe the pre-flood people would be in layers above those. It's not because these creatures evolved after the ones below it. It's because these creatures below it were buried first, and then the creatures above were buried later, all during that single flood year. So that's the flood idea, a little bit of it. And to investigate that, I thought, were these really flooded? I mean, is Noah's flood really real? Is that how you explain these dinosaur fossils? Because every time I read something about these dinosaur fossils, it says, or I see a TV show, it says the same story. The dinosaur died of a good old age, and it peacefully laid down and gave up the ghost. And then slowly some sediment closed over it and buried it. And that's how and then it got locked in rock eventually after long ages of slow and gradual sediment burial. And that's the story that I'm told. And it does not fit the catastrophic death that I see in these actual fossils. So let's look at evidence of catastrophic death. Well, here's a sauropod with a shorter neck on display at the Carnegie Museum, Pittsburgh. So I went there to see that one. And it's called, say it after me, Camarasaurus. Camarasaurus. And there it is. And so it's a beautiful specimen. I mean, it's very rare that you find a dinosaur with just a whole bone, let alone 2 bones still articulated or connected, and let further alone, most of the carcass is still together. And with sauropods, their heads are almost always removed, and they've been ripped off and separated. I mean, it's catastrophic what we usually see. But in this case, the head is still there. But it's sort of got this weird, like his chin is down. And so there were some scientists that got curious about that. And they asked themselves, is this like how the dinosaur preferred to live its life? Like walking around with its chin down, or what? Like, what's going on with this head? And I read through the paper, and I got to the end where they're talking about the conclusion, and this is what the scientists wrote about this Camarasaurus. And there's my photo of it, so you can see the chin, or the neck. It said, the postmortem dorsiflexion disarticulated the zygapophyses such that it was preserved in a pose that was unlikely attainable in life. And I thought, I mean, tell me something new, because everyone knows that. So then I got a dictionary, and I looked up every word, and I had to translate it, and it said, it's got a broken neck, and it broke its neck after it died. And so this is catastrophic. This is not normal. So something was smooshing it, and it's got its neck arched back in this death pose. So here's some more evidence. Here's one of the stories. You could see the standard story in National Geographic's family book on dinosaurs. Don't buy theirs. Buy ours. Ours is a family book on dinosaurs, fully loaded with pictures. We have a few copies left here. It's called Guide to Dinosaurs. But their storytelling starts here with, you want to say Compsognathus? Go ahead. I guess you don't. Okay. You don't have to. I'm just inviting you, you know. Compsognathus lived close to the shore of a calm lake. Is that a scientific statement? That is a historical statement. It's a statement about the past. And so my question for a scientist is, how do you know that Compsognathus lived close to the shore of a calm lake? How do you know the lake was calm? Did you have a weather gauge back when it was buried? Were you there? Have you been to a calm lake? Do you have calm lakes in the Alvin area? Pretty calm? I'm getting like no reaction. Do you have lakes? Have you heard of a lake?
They're called tanks.
Tanks. Ponds and tanks, which are calm, usually calm. So I've been to calm lakes and ponds, and there are 0 fossils forming. So when a fish dies in a calm lake, it turns into turtle food. And it's gone. It gets recycled. And what doesn't get scavenged rots. And so fossils are not forming today. Anyway, so I'm asking myself, not only do I think it's storytelling about this thing lived close to the shore of a calm lake, I think it's bad storytelling. Because calm lakes don't produce fossils, and that's what you're telling me. And then it says, after death, the animal's body sank to the bottom of the lake, and the calm waters, very calm, calm down, we know what we're talking about, we have white lab coats. And then the process of fossilization could begin. It's all storytelling. You don't even know if the creature lived there at all. Maybe he lived over yonder and was transported and died to where he is buried. He got buried. So this is all storytelling through and through. So I'm looking at Compsognathid type dinosaurs. It's a small, it's like the size of a turkey, full grown. The one on the left is a Compsognathus from, I think it's from Europe. And then the one on the right, same exact body form, but it was found in China. So therefore, we get to give it a new name, and it's called Sinosauropteryx. Say that. That's pretty good. You guys are getting better. Exact same body. They're just the same dinosaur kind, but again, we have extra names. But the point is here, look at these carcasses. And the calm waters took its head and calmly smashed it against its pelvis. Is that what happened? No, this is not calm at all. This is catastrophic. Catastrophic death. Well, they finally got it right. So I'm at the Museum of the Rockies in Bozeman, Montana, and I look at this dinosaur fossil, and I love it when the fossil is still what we call in situation or in situ. It's got its bones in position where they were found instead of repositioned in some sort of getup. So it's surrounded with mud that turned to stone, and it says, the sign accompanying it said, an agonizing death. And I thought, yes, you got it right. So I took a picture of that, agonizing death. And then I read the fine print, and if you read this sign, you can see it was choking because its neck is arched back, and it's the choking posture. And I thought, wow, they're about to say that it's choking on the mud that it was surrounded by, and that would be really consistent with the whole idea that the flood brought all this mud and covered a whole continent and buried fish and sharks and turtles and dinosaurs and alligators and et cetera, all together, but no dogs and deer people in these layers because it was wetlands, I think. And that would be great. And I'm reading, and it says it's choking probably because it was a predatory dinosaur was clamped on its neck. Where's the predatory dinosaur? There's no predator in view anywhere. And so it's choking on the mud. But if they were to admit that it's choking on mud, then they'd have to admit, well, that dinosaur there with its neck arched back also choked on mud, and that bird in the same layers with the dinosaurs, its neck is arched back, it was choking on mud, and they'd have to say all these dinosaurs on every single continent, including Antarctica, has sedimentary rock layers in it with dinosaur fossils in it, and they all have they have clams in them. So it's like, and they all have bird fossils in them. It's like something took sea creatures and swamp creatures and sky creatures, knocked those out of the sky, brought these up from the sea, mushed them all together, and then spread it out across all the continents in the whole world. Now, what could that possibly be that would do that? I'm thinking Noah's flood. That's what I'm thinking. But these guys are like a predatory dinosaur. Okay. The flood is a better explanation, in my view. You be your own judge, but I'm just telling you the evidence for catastrophic death. Okay. Here is the world's most famous single dinosaur specimen, I think, probably, and it's nicknamed Sue after the discoverer, Sue Hendrickson. It's on display at the Field Museum in Chicago, and there is a replica with every bone put back into life position. They did it really well. It's on the top left of my screen here. And then there's Sue, the actual Sue, in a glass box so that we can worship and examine and look really close at Sue's head. And these two people are reading a sign that's talking about the difference between the replica and the real. Do you notice a difference between the replica and the real? Look closely at the nose. Okay, so does this mouth show up? So we have a dent right here. This got smashed down, and then we have a broken nose there. So is this calm or catastrophic? So that's the question I'm asking. And here's the explanation for the broken nose, that these people are calmly reading. Calmly reading. And we traded places. And so I'm on the other side, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to take a picture of what these people were just reading with a straight face. I couldn't believe it, because here's what the sign said. Crushed nose. When Sue was found, her pelvis, that's this part, was on top of her snout. That's this part. Something turned this dinosaur into a pretzel. Though it may sound odd, and yes it does, discovering a theropod dinosaur in this death pose is surprisingly common. Well, that means it's odd there, and it's odd there, and it's odd everywhere it occurs. It means it's really odd. This pose may be caused by, can you read it? It says muscle spasms. Muscle spasms, that's their explanation. And I'm laughing out loud, and I'm like, and the people are looking at me and backing away like I'm some sort of weird. I'm like, did you read the sign? Muscle spasms? Muscle spasms. Because, yeah, I have muscle spasms, and every time I do, it causes my hips to smash my nose, and I have to go to the chiropractor. It's a whole thing. Muscle spasms. Now, I'm not discounting the idea that muscle spasms occurred as these animals were buried, and you can move it'll move a carcass even after it's dead, and it can slide around a little bit. But taking its hips and smashing its nose, not a muscle spasm. It's catastrophic death. So these animals were twisted into pretzels and tied in knots and smashed to pieces, and fragments of bones are scattered in lots of places and spread out across rock layers that extend for hundreds of square miles. Some of them cover and span across continents. They leap across oceans, some of these rock layers. So I'm looking at T-Rex at these different places, and I'm thinking, how did this guy get buried? Like large creatures, cows don't turn into fossils. Elephants don't turn into fossils. Not even fish turn into fossils today. So how did these turn into fossils? And the only thing I can think of is that the mud was moving faster than they could run or swim. Otherwise, they would run or swim away. So it's got to be moving faster. And with more force or power, it was overwhelmingly powerful, this flood mud. So that they were tumbled in this flood mud as it's sliding along the continent, I imagine. And they couldn't even bulldoze their way out of it after they were completely covered and then catastrophically buried. So that's evidence of catastrophic death, not slow and gradual, not calm in any way. And that's what I see when I read the Bible. And the Bible says the waters prevailed exceedingly on the earth, and all the high hills and the whole heaven. Those are the high hills in the pre-flood world, guys. Not today's high hills. Today's Himalayas and Rockies formed during the flood year, not before. Were covered, and the waters prevailed, and all flesh died that moved on the earth. Now, you need a lot of water for a lot of months. By the way, how long was Noah's flood? Noah's flood lasted? Yeah, if you're saying a year, you're on target. About a year. A couple days more than a year. So 40 days and 40 nights was just the start. That was just the rain bit. And then it was just tsunami after tsunami after that. And the Bible says that the whole world was covered. In fact, Peter reiterates it, taking this verse straightforwardly. And Peter said, 2 Peter 3, 5 and 6, the world that then existed perished. The world that then existed perished, being overflowed with water. And I believe him. I believe him now more, that I've seen these dinosaurs and other creatures having suffered catastrophic death. Well, if dinosaurs were on the ark, the ones that were not on the ark died a catastrophic death. Noah's flood left all those fossils behind. But the ones on the ark, what happened to them? Did they live after they got off the ark? And where would I look for evidence for that if they did live after they got off the ark? And I would not look in the fossils, because the fossils stopped forming at the end of the flood. So we need to have evidence on top of the rock layers. And so that would be evidence, maybe I'd look in human artifacts. So looking at human artifacts, we see lots of tails of dragons, and we see lots of artwork that shows pictures of dragons that some of our ancestors called dragons, other names for it. The Chinese have a word called long, that's their word for dragon. So different, in fact, every language, every basic language has a word for dragon, or a large scary reptile. Even the Native American Indians have legends of their clashes with dragons. And there's lots to be said about this, lots to look at. And I'll say that there are many, many artifacts that show pictures of dragons, and most of them they look fanciful. They look like today's cartoon dragons, like Jane and the Dragon with the tiny little flappy wings. That wouldn't work. But some of them, sprinkled here and there throughout human history, look like what we know from fossils. For example, here's a tiny, it's about this big, it's a cylinder seal, and they would roll it out on a piece of clay. This is on display at the Louvre in Paris Museum. And it's got these creatures with long tails, legs that go straight down, and long necks that are intertwining. And this is called the Uruk. This is one of the Uruk cylinder seals. And it's got a bird there. And, well, it looks very sauropod-y. And it's not a spitting image of a sauropod, but it's pretty close. And how is it, if it's not a sauropod, then how is it that they knew to draw? Is it just pure accident, that this ancient artist was able to draw, or carve rather, this cylinder seal so that it looked just like, or almost just like, a sauropod? Now, over 1,000 miles away from there in England, over 1,000 years later, the Uruk cylinder seal is very old. This is 1400s here. At the floor of Carlisle Cathedral in England, there's a bishop who is buried in the floor of the cathedral. And so that's what they did with their pastors, Kurt. When they passed away, they just buried them in the floor. So we're going to have to get a backhoe in here and dig up some of this concrete, plop you in it. If you do, I'll make you a decoration and put brass around it. And this Bishop Bell was quite a guy. He had quite a decoration. And they would walk right over it, for centuries. They walked. That's why it's been thinned out so it's harder to see. The faces of these two intertwined heads are now kind of worn down, but you could still make out what it was. Legs that go straight down, long tails, long necks intertwined, but one of them, the one on the left, has a tail spikes at the end of that tail. And there's 4 tail spikes at the end of that one. Now, it wasn't until the 1990s that scientists ever even discovered that there were sauropods with tail spikes. And they found one, and they called it, say it after me if you like, Shunosaurus. Shunosaurus. And they found, guess how many tail spikes on Shunosaurus? Count them, 4. And so these are more of a spitting image. Anyway, so maybe he got into a time machine, went forward in time to the 1990s, looked at the scientific literature, and then went back in time to the 1400s and carved a spitting image of a Shunosaurus there in England. That's one hypothesis that you can consider. There are others. Here's the Narmer palette from ancient Egypt. And what is the pharaoh saying? I'm the big bull. You see the bull heads on the top. I'm the bull of the woods. It's all about me. I'm the pharaoh. And I can tame the biggest, baddest beast that ever lived. Egyptian word for the sauropod. They had a word for it, pimwa, and that's just the same as behemoth. It's the same. It's like the transliteration into Hebrew there. Anyways, legs straight down, necks intertwined. There in ancient Egypt. Now this is in Chateau du Blois. It's in the Blois Valley in France. Haven't been yet. Like to go. Friends of mine have gone and told me about this tapestry there. And back before the swamps were drained, they had wetlands in the Blois Valley, B-L-O-I-S, how we spell that. But we are from France, so we have to pronounce it very special. Blois. Now, on the left, there's this big creature with lots of scales, and it does not match anything I know from fossils. It just looks like some big, scary swamp creature. But on the right, the mouth structure, the size, the body form, it's a spitting image of what we know from North American fossils as Maiasaura. It looks like a little juvenile Maiasaur there on the right. What about not even dinosaurs? But there were other kinds of creatures that we know lived, and we know they died in the flood because we have fossils. All the dinosaurs are now gone, but so are all the mammal-like reptiles. There's a whole group called mammal-like reptiles. They weren't mammals, they weren't reptiles, but they are their own thing. It's like dinosaurs were reptiles, but they're unique in that they had legs that went straight down, dinosaur legs, straight down from the body. Today's reptiles, like alligators and lizards, the arm goes out from the body and then down. So they kind of waddle when they walk. But the dinosaurs did this. Or if you're T-Rex, they just did this. And what were these things? I mean, nobody knows. What is this? I don't even know. By the way, I get to do this, and I'm a professional. It's amazing. So here we are at the Nile mosaic of Palestrina in Italy, and this is 100 BC, so it's made 100 years before, or plus, before the Lord Jesus was around. And it's just, it's a picture of what's going on the other side of the Mediterranean, the Nile River side, and in North Africa there. And what's going on down there? They were really curious. And this would have been laid out on a floor, and they would have had a little worship center there in the town. Well, the natives are grumpy. Look at them with their spears and shields. What are they mad at? Some creature with two big tusks. And if you look at the anatomy of this creature, it doesn't match any known anatomy of dinosaur that I know of, but it does look like a creature that also went extinct after the flood, I think, and also would have gone on board the ark and lived for some time after the flood, maybe long enough for these Africans to actually see it. And it's called, if you want to look it up someday, called Gorgonopsid. It's a Gorgonopsid, maybe, look-alike. Well, skeptics say, well, obviously Gorgonopsid can't be alive with humans because Gorgonopsids died in these layers down here, which were deposited 70 million years ago or whatever, and humans didn't live until only 3 million years ago in layers up here, so it can't be a Gorgonopsid. Don't be so silly. It must be like a crocodile, except that they already have crocodiles in the same exact piece of art, and they look exactly like crocodiles. And there's a hippo and these creatures that have survived until today. Some creatures go extinct over time, guys. What makes creatures go extinct? There's two main factors, even today, and you kids might be the last generation to see a white rhino. And they're not named white because they're white, they're not white, but that's another story. But it's going extinct, and if you want to get a chance to see one in South Africa, see it, because bye-bye white rhinos. And they have less and less habitat. So it's habitat loss. There's no place for them to live. And big creatures need lots of space to live. And I think we should do a better job as stewards of God's creation to give these creatures spaces to live. Again, another story. But the habitat loss due to humans move in, change the habitat, make it habitable by draining swamps and such, making farmland. And humans move in and we remove threats to our young ones. There's a road where I live in Dallas called Bear Creek Road, and there's no bears. The pioneers named it Bear Creek because there used to be bears in Bear Creek in Dallas. There's no bears within 100 miles of Dallas. So we get rid of the threats because those bears were eating our little kids, and we don't want them to do that. And maybe the ancients pulled out their slings and spears and AR-15s and got rid of those threats back then. So habitat loss, human encroachment, that kind of thing, that's what kills creatures today, and why not the same thing back in the day also? Well, here we are in Cambodia, and buried in the jungle is this giant stone temple with these pillars. And you could see a bull, a water buffalo, there's a parrot, there's a weird lion-looking dude, and then there's this creature with big plates on its back, carved in stone from the Middle Ages there in the jungle. And what's it look like to you? Looks pretty steggy to me. Here we go to Barcelona, and man, this is some medieval artist's depiction of the famous story of St. George and the Dragon. And it turns out that each artist seemed, in different countries across Europe, they seemed to pick a different dragon to represent St. George's dragon. And this one is this image, and I'm telling you, and I'm showing you, it's the spitting image of not even a dinosaur. It's an extinct aquatic marine reptile, not marine, it's like an extinct aquatic reptile, we think. And he probably ate fish, but it's got those distinctive long teeth that go outside of its mouth. And it's got that distinctive flat skull. And it's the same shape and body size as we would expect in comparison to the size of the horse, all that we know from fossils. So the rendering on the right has been done just based on the Nothosaurus fossil. And it's in Triassic layers, which are beneath most of the dinosaur layers. But they're all the layers. If all the layers are deposited in Noah's flood, almost all, then we would expect even those creatures down there to have been buried and then to have gone extinct since the flood. So there's a spitting image of Nothosaurus in Barcelona. So there's lots more. And we have a beautiful book that you can get called Dire Dragons. We sell it at the ICR bookstore along with 100 other books that support creation. But clashes with dragons indicate to me that indeed dinosaurs did live after the flood for a time in certain places. And that's why we have legends of dragon slayings, and legends of clashes with dragons. That's why we have all this artwork. And that might even be consistent with why we have a description of what looks like a dinosaur right there in the pages of the Bible. Job 40. Starting in verse 15, God is telling Job, look now at the behemoth which I made along with you. See now, his strength is in his hips. Do you remember the Diplodocus? The Diplodocus hips? And that's the highest point of its body for the Diplodocus was its hips. And he could actually take that long tail and plop it down on the ground, and he could rear up, and he could raise up his front legs, and he could take that long neck and reach high into the treetops whenever he did that. And so it's like his tail turned into a tree when he planted it in the ground and made a tripod out of his body. But he's pivoting on his hips when he does that. He moves his tail like a cedar. Now, there's a Bible translation note that says behemoth, possibly a hippopotamus. So I went to the Dallas Zoo, and I watched the hippo, and I looked at the hippo tail, and I said, is that hippo tail anything like a tree? And it's a tiny little flap thing. And he sat there for hours in the water, and finally he takes a break, comes out onto this little plot of land, only so he could do something I wish I never had saw. And he used his tail as a fertilizer distributor device, complete with full sound effects. Don't look it up on the internet. You'll be scarred for life. Doesn't move his tail like a cedar. That's not how a cedar moves. It's not how a cedar looks in any way. So I think a better description would be maybe a sauropod dinosaur, something like that. Alive, back in the Middle East, when Job was alive in the Middle East. Well, when was Job alive in the Middle East? During the Ice Age, which happened after the flood. Does that mean that the Middle East was covered with ice? No, the whole world was not covered with ice during the Ice Age, just the northern and southern latitudes. The ice has melted back since, and the deserts have grown since then. But the Middle East was once tropical and wet, and those wetlands that Job may have lived in, he may have seen behemoth there in those wetlands. You can learn more about that with our resources. Okay, last two dinosaur details I wish I knew. Collagen decay is one of them, and collagen is the name of a protein that decays over time. It's what our blood vessels are made of. It's what skin is made of. And look at these connective tissues and blood vessels from a Tyrannosaurus rex. These images were published in the journal Science back in 2005. And there I was at the Museum of the Rockies a second time, and now they have on display the skull associated with the femur where they found this soft tissue. And I was in the museum saying, this is it. And I was taking this picture of the skull, and I'm taking my picture of this skull. This is the one where they found the blood vessels. everybody come look. And everyone backs away. I don't know why they're not excited. I'm excited. Well, they published that, but then the scientific community said, that can't be from a dinosaur because, listen to our logic, those dinosaurs died 70 million years ago. Tissues don't last even 1 million years, so therefore you must have dug up the wrong stuff, or you dropped your lunch into the test tube. It did not come from the T-Rex. So the researchers went to a different country, different rock layer, different dinosaur specimen, and they used a different laboratory to test it. And they found the same things anyways. Blood vessels from a hadrosaur type of dinosaur, duckbill type. Now, did they have a duckbill? No. They had a mouth in the shape of a duck's bill, and they had all kinds of different weird head crests, but they're all one kind of dinosaur, the hadrosaur dinosaurs. But blood vessels still there, and bone cells right out of there. Wow. And this is a mosasaur, if you want to say that. Mosasaur. Swam with a tail like a shark, and so it's an extinct marine reptile. Found in the middle of Kansas, the chalks, the Niobrara chalk formation. It outcrops in Kansas, where there's lots of fish fossils in it. But I studied it. I dug there and digging some fish fossils. And I was like, I wonder how far, because you look from the dig site in Kansas, and it just goes to the horizon. You can see where this white rock just outcrops, and you see all the way to the end. How far does it go? And then geologists drill. They drill down, and they run into the same chalk beneath the surface. But that same chalk goes from Canada to Mexico, all deposited at one time. Catastrophically. And recently, as is evidenced by this red patch. And by the way, the researchers studying this, they were looking at the skin scales that had stuck down onto the bone, and they looked into its eye area where its eye used to be, and they found it was still colored purple from the residue of the retina at the back of the eye that left a purple stain. And the pigments of a retina were still in there, and they found this red patch in its chest cavity. And boy, was I shocked to see this very same specimen on display at the Los Angeles County Museum of Natural History. And I told my buddies, this is the one with the heart. Come on, guys, look, it's still colored red because of the heart. And everyone else is backing away again. I need to come up with a different reaction to these amazing discoveries that are on display in these museums. Well, anyway, there's me pointing to the heart tissue, still colored red, and they detected, indeed, hemoglobin decay fragments. So we have hemoglobin protein, collagen protein, and many other proteins found in the fossils. Even recently, some DNA. This one was published way back in 2022, showing the differences between modern crocodile blood vessels and blood vessels from a fossil, Thoracosaurus, which is a crocodile-like creature buried in the same layers as dinosaurs. This one was excavated from New Jersey. And so we have these things all over the place, and we keep finding more and more of them. Well, I was fortunate to do some research on my own using a special technique called cross-polarized light microscopy. And so this is an image that I took. I'm just going to pause it here. Pause. Image that I took. What you're looking at is I took the bone and I polished it really thin, put it on a glass slide, and then I put it on a microscope. Microscope shines a light up through the bone, and then you could see this region here that's really colorful, like a rainbow. That's a hole where a blood vessel used to go through that hole. Same with this one. Blood vessel used to go through this hole, and in those spaces, minerals have precipitated. That means that they come out of solution, like rock candy would do. And so now we have calcite in those spaces. So that's what that is. And you have these little black dots, and those are places where bone cells used to live and make new bone. But what we're interested in is these regions that are blue. If it goes from blue to gold, it still has collagen in the bone, and that's our best interpretation thus far. We still have to defend that a little further, but our preliminary indications are that it goes blue, watch the blue turn, boom, red, and then gold, bam. It's just beautiful to see all that collagen still in the bone. Indirect indirect preliminary detection of collagen in the bone. Isn't that cool? So there's collagen, and it can't last even 1,000,000 years based on lab bench studies, and yet it's in these bones that are supposed to be 70 million years old. I don't think they're that old. I think that these fossils were buried in Noah's flood only thousands of years ago, and that's why we still see all these tissues and proteins in these fossils. And that's what I should expect to have found, really, the possibility of it anyway, since Jesus believed in recent creation, apparently, because he said this to the Pharisees, listen, Pharisees, but billions of years after the Big Bang beginning, God made them male and female. Oh, wait, I think I misread it. Right from the beginning, God made them male and female, and the two shall become one flesh. He's quoting the phrases, made them male and female. That's a quote from Genesis chapter, take a guess, 1. And then, and the two shall be one flesh, is a quote from Genesis chapter 2. So Jesus is quoting from these two chapters as though they convey to us the actual factual history of the beginning of the world. And you know what? Jesus happens to be God, and I happen to not know as much as God, so I decided that I'd take a back seat and let the Holy Spirit decide that he's more learned than I am. And I think he got it right. And the decay of collagen and now radiocarbon, I say carbon to make it alliterate, but radiocarbon is a short-lived version of the carbon atom or isotope, and it's got an even shorter shelf life. You know, the shelf life of collagen might last, several 100,000 years under ideal conditions based on lab decay studies, but carbon-14, it only lasts 100,000 years in theory. So if we find radiocarbon or carbon-14 in like a sample, a rock or a bone or not a rock really, there's certain rocks that have carbon, most don't, but if we find it in any sample from Earth, from underground, we can say with confidence that it allows us to rule out the idea that this is millions of years old or tens of millions or hundreds of millions or whatever number that my colleagues have attached to these samples. So, did we find it in our hadrosaur vertebra? We found measurable amounts of radiocarbon. We sent it off to the lab. They said, yeah, we found radiocarbon in this. And they said, what is this? And we said, we're not telling. Found it in a triceratops left brow horn core, the core, and found it there. We even found it in this from the Morrison Formation, which has stained its fossils with dark minerals like manganese and magnesium. That's why they look darker than other fossils in other layers, just because the chemistry that surrounded these bones after the creatures were buried. And I thought, it's been stained. There's lots of minerals from the outside. It's probably not going to have any result, but sure enough, it came back with measurable amount above background levels for nerds out there, above background levels. And same with Stegosaurus, also Morrison Formation, central Colorado, radiocarbon in there, as though it's thousands and not millions of years old. We thought maybe this is just with fossils in North America. So we sampled a fossil from China. So if you want to say it after me, it's fun to say. It's called Psittacosaurus. Psittacosaurus, which starts with the letter P, which is actually even more fun. Yes, we found it in Psittacosaurus, but this matches what our scientists have been doing, researching coal. Found it in coal. Diamonds have an age assignment of billions, 1, 2, or 3 billion years, depending on who you want to talk to. But we found radiocarbon in it, as though these diamonds are only thousands of years old. Diamonds formed recently. Diamonds formed, and the carbon and the radiocarbon we have on Earth, wherever we test it, we find radiocarbon, as though the whole Earth, all the continents, look like they have fresh-looking radiocarbon. And this all points to the reality and the defensibility of Noah's flood and of creation. Clever design shows us creation got it right. Catastrophic death shows us the flood formed fossils. And then clashes with dragons indicates that these dinosaurs lived even after the flood with humans. And then collagen decay indicates that they're recently formed. Radiocarbon decay indicates that they're recently formed. And that fits the Bible and the Bible's history of creation and the flood. And Jesus said this, for if you believe Moses, you would believe me, for he wrote about me. And we live in a culture, guys, where so many people don't believe. So many of our friends and family members don't believe. And if you don't believe Moses' writings, he wrote about me. He also wrote about what? The creation of the world and the flooding of the world. And if we can't defend the creation of the world and the flooding of the world, Moses' writings, then it's going to be really hard for people to believe in Jesus' words. And what are Jesus' words? Guys, you sin, and the death penalty the penalty for sin is death, but I'm going to pay it for you. And I'm going to pay your death, I'm going to pay your fine, and I'll commute your death sentence so that you can go free because I went on your behalf. And I rose from the dead so that you could have new life in me, life that lasts forever. That message will transform you if you believe it and if you trust Christ himself. Say, yes, Lord, I'm a sinner. I can't fix me, but you can. Please do it. And that message is in the scripture, the same scripture that teaches creation and the flood. And the more we know about this, the more we can defend it, the more confidence that we have in the face of a hostile and disbelieving world that the Bible got it right and Jesus is the real Savior. And so we have resources that emphasize this, including Guide to Dinosaurs. And if you want to know like what kind of other creatures were buried with dinosaurs that museums don't tell you, Guide to Dinosaurs. If you like this presentation, we have it on DVD, or you can download the download video. You can download the videos off the download video thing at icr.org/store. And I hope that you guys get copies of my little book called Dinosaurs in the Bible. I wrote it for my dad because he was an unbeliever, and I wanted to show him just a simple way of showing that dinosaurs do fit in the Christian worldview, and it makes a pretty good little gift. One gal found it and came up to me at a presentation, and she said, I saw this in the grocery store, picked it up, bought it, and it transformed my whole life, and now I believe the Bible and I believe in Jesus. Can I get a picture with you? And I said, okay. That was really great. We love designing these books. Science for Kids, the series, and the Dinosaurs books for kids. This is for mom and dad to read to the little tots, the wee tots. They look at the picture, mom and dad reads the bit. And we've had Sunday school teachers say, I was reading your book on dinosaurs to the kids, and I didn't know about the soft tissues and the blood vessels that are still in these dinosaur bones. Wow. And so it's really our devious plot to actually teach adults who won't read books, but they'll read it to their kids. And of course, Creation Basics and Beyond, we have a few copies left, and that's got dinosaur and all kinds of related questions answered in that book. And thank you so much for signing up for Acts and Facts yesterday. And of course, it's a free publication. It comes with Days of Praise, a daily devotional that our scientists write. All of these resources are here for what? Building us up in faith, reminding us that we have not believed a silly tale. We have believed in the truth. We trust in the actual factual history that God's Word has revealed to us, and science backs it up. Thanks. Okay, so if you have a few questions, we'll just be real loud with your question. Yes, sir, in the back.
On the floods, we found them in, I don't know how many, but should we find them in another soft tissue? Find them in nearly all the fossils?
Shouldn't we find soft tissue in nearly all the fossils, you ask? Oh, the answer would be no, because it has been underground for 4,400 years. And that's a long enough time for microbes to have access to them. So you really have to have pristine conditions in addition to a relatively shorter time scale. So it can last thousands of years, but only if the germs don't get to it, and only if radiation doesn't get to it, and especially other factors like pH. It can dissolve these things, or even heat. So I've excavated bones and looked for soft tissue in them, and found them. And I've excavated the same type of bone from a different location where there's no fossils, there's no original protein left. And I found that the difference is heat. So if that fossil got baked in the past, then all the organics got burned and baked out of it. And that happened in a lot of places where you find fossils because of what geologists call hydrothermal activity. So that's hot water seeping and creeping and steam running through these rocks, even as they were being deposited during the torrential and horrific Noah's flood. Orange shirt, yes, sir.
So T-Rexes, their arms, were they actually that short, or could they have forearms made of muscles that did not stay?
So you talk about the T-Rex forearms? Yeah, so really no one knows, and I don't know. Some people, everyone has a theory. A theory that I tend to like, and we'll never know because we don't see them alive. We can't see them moving and living. But one theory is that they used their arms back when their bodies were smaller, because it came out of an egg this size, and then they grow to 45 feet long. And so back when they were like 10 feet long, their arms would have been long enough to do stuff with. But then they get a certain size, they just don't need them, and so they just sort of, they fold them up as they grow older. That's one theory. I don't know the answer. No one knows what they did. But they couldn't even reach its chin, so, but there's other theories out there. And a little girl with the black shirt.
How can you differentiate if the fossils you find are genuinely fossil versus something?
Yeah, how do you know if a fossil is a fossil versus like a rock or something like that? So we look at the shape of it, and we look at what it's made of. And one way to test if you have a fossil is if it was once a bone and it still has that bone structure and it's broken. So if it was a bone, you have part of the outside shape of it, but it broke, you can take that and you could stick it to your tongue, and if it sticks to your tongue, it's a fossil. Because there's little tiny pores or holes in that, and they wick the moisture from your tongue, and it sticks to your tongue if it's a fossil. That's only for certain fossils. And if you try to lick a rock, it's going to slide right off. Then you have to wipe your face. It's really kind of gross. But that's one way. So but we basically look at the shape. We look at the shape, and we determine that it's a fossil. And yes, ma'am, you had a question?
Yeah, how do evolutionists use the carbon dating to prove the age of things? And is it the same type of thing you were describing?
No, they don't use radiocarbon to prove the ages of rock layers. They use radiocarbon dating mostly in archaeology, which is human artifacts. Okay, so the radiocarbon ages we found are pretty reliable for the last 2,000, maybe 3,000 years of historical artifacts. But we do have carbon dates that start to diverge from calendar ages, starting around the time of the Exodus. So around 3,000 years ago, 3,500 years ago, I'm a 1446 BC Exodus person based on the chronology that's in the Bible. But we have hundreds of radiocarbon dates for artifacts with known archaeological provenance from the Exodus time in Egypt. And the radiocarbon dates are always, in certain sites, 100 years older than the actual calendar year. So, and if you go further back on the calendar, then the radiocarbon age gets older and older still. And there's like something was going on with the radiocarbon levels during the Ice Age that messed them up. And so they're no longer reliable for artifacts. But they do use other radioisotopes to look at to assign ages to like igneous rocks, like granites or even volcanic rocks. And interestingly, even secular scientists have done studies to test those dating methods. One method that they tested was the potassium-argon decay system used in dating methods, and they tested it on rocks of known age. They said so this lava cooled, and we know that it cooled when this volcano exploded. It's a matter of written records, human history, and it's 200 years old, let's say. And so how many argon years is it? And it turns out that it's always old. It's always like 1.2 million years old for a rock that's only 200 years old and things like that. And then we took that and we said, if you guys can test whether or not radioisotope dating works on rocks, so can we. So our scientists back in the 1990s and the late 80s, we've been around since 1970, the Institute. And so we got access to a brand new rock that had formed in 1982 in the crater of Mount St. Helens. And we, in 1992, which makes it a how old rock? 10-year-old rock. We sampled that and we took it to different dating methods, sent it off to a radioisotope dating lab, and we got age ranges from 500,000 to 2 million years for a 10-year-old rock. So we know that the isotope systems are not giving us reliable ages for rocks of known age. Why would we trust those systems to give us dates for rocks of unknown age? Well, we got some antsy hands in the back, and I just want to do 3 more so my voice doesn't die. And we'll do 3 more, and then if you have a question after that, then hang out at the book table and we'll answer that question. White shirt, yes, sir.
Why do you not find humans or cows or something like that?
Yeah, we do find cows and camels and horses as fossils, but we find those in the uppermost layers, okay, in the uppermost layers. And what we need is we need some Bible-minded, creation-thinking paleontologist to get access to those layers that have camels in them and start looking for maybe there's people in there. Because if my evolution friends found a human bone mixed in with a camel bone, they would say, this layer is deposited 30 million years ago. It can't possibly be human, because they refuse to think that humans were ever possibly around before 3 million or so years ago. So they would misidentify it. So that's what we need. That's where we need to look, is in the layers with the camels. Yes, ma'am, in the back. When did this process start? You mean the process of my discovery? The process started when I met Pastor Kurt in 1991. That's in the last century, so it's really a long time ago. And last question, yes, sir, in the back with the dinosaur suit. Thank you for wearing a dinosaur suit. I really appreciate it.
Do we find dinosaurs inside dinosaurs?
Yes, rare, but there's a few. One was just found a few years ago where a small dinosaur was inside the belly area of a larger dinosaur. I've also seen, there's a fossil mammal called a Rapinomamus, and it's the spitting image of today's Tasmanian devil. And it was found in the belly of a dinosaur from China. So I think that they were alive with Tasmanian devils and eating them. Delicious. Thanks very much, everybody. And I'll see you at the book table if you have any more questions. Thank you.